for this evening. Might have passed them on. They will be selling books now and at the end of the program as well. So pick your favorite time to buy a book. And so now, tonight's event. Tonight, I'm happy to welcome Jaquira Díaz to the Pratt Library to discuss her novel, This is the Only Kingdom. When Maricarmen meets Rey el Cantante, beloved small-time Robin Hood and local musician on the rise, she begins to envision a life beyond the tight-knit community of El Caserío, Puerto Rico, beyond cleaning houses, beyond waiting tables, beyond the constant tug of war between the street hustlers and los camarones. But breaking free proves more difficult than she imagined, and she soon finds herself struggling to make a home for herself, for Rey, his young brother Tito, and eventually their daughter Nena, until one fateful day, everything changes. Jaquira Díaz will be joined in conversation this evening by storyteller and poet Adrian Gaston Garcia. Jaquira Díaz is the author of the memoir Ordinary Girls, winner of a Whiting Award, a Florida Book Awards Gold Medal, a Lambda Literary Awards finalist, an American Booksellers Association Indies Introduced selection, a Barnes & Noble's Discover Great New Writer selection, an Indie Next Pick, a Library Reads Pick, and finalist for the B&N Discover Prize. She's the recipient of the Jean Cordova Prize for Lesbian/Queer Nonfiction, the Alonzo Davis Fellowship from VCCA, 2 Pushcart Prizes, an Elizabeth George Foundation grant, and fellowships from MacDowell, the Kenyon Review, Breadloaf, Sewanee, the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing, and the Black Mountain Institute at UNLV. Her stories, poems, and essays have been anthologized in the Best American Essays, the Breakbeat Poets Volume 4, Latinx, Best American Experimental Writing, and the Pushcart Prize Anthology. Adrian Gaston Garcia, aka AGG, is a queer Latin storyteller and poet. His recent work includes co-directing and performing in Joteria, Our Untold Stories, at Arena Stage during DC Latinx Pride and World Pride 2025. He has also served as creative co-director for Noche de Joteria variety show and as executive producer and co-director of Oya DC. Adrian was the 2023 and 2025 featured poet at the District of Pride Showcased, hosted by the Mayor's Office of LGBTQ Affairs, and a storyteller for Story District's 2023 Outspoken LGBTQ+ Pride Special. He is the co-host and producer of Los Bookies podcast, a podcast for queer Latin bookworms, and the founder of Tintas DC, a writers group centering Latin voices in the DMV. Kirkus Reviews relay that Diaz writes beautifully about grief, identity, addiction, family, and the blurry line between myth, truth, and history. A sweeping and touching debut about love, generational trauma, and complex mother-daughter relationships. People magazine called the book gutting and gorgeous. And author Angie Cruz commented, "This is an extraordinary debut. Jaquira Díaz delivers a haunting meditation around the painful bonds of family and immerses readers in a world where the echoes of the past shape the future in devastating ways. A poignant, mesmerizing read that cements Diaz as a writer to be reckoned with." It's my great pleasure to welcome Jaquira Díaz and Adrian Gaston Garcia.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to read a little bit right from the opening, which is short, and you don't really have to know anything in order to get what's happening. It's a prologue, and we just jump right into the story. Hours before they find him, everything burns. Smoke rising in black clouds, the golden cañaverales, the dark sky, an explosion of birds and mongooses, lizards, snakes, everything bolting from the fires, dry leaves crackling, embers, ash, The slow crawl, the body heaving, groping for something steady in the cane. The coquillas fading, quieting, and then silent. Late morning out in the fields, a cane cutter from La Central pushes aside the burnt stalks with his gloved hand, his protective headgear and thick coveralls weighing him down. After last night's controlled burns, the ground smolders in some places, the heat rising under his heavy boots. It's May 1993, and by noon, it already feels like midsummer. He swings his machete, cuts through a stem, swings it again. He tosses the burnt stalks aside as he takes them down, keeps moving, leaving them to be collected by the other guys. He wades through the charred debris, reaching for the next stalk. He works at a slow, steady pace, striding through the cañaveral. Breathe, swing, strike. He can't move too quickly because he might faint in this heat. Slow and steady. Swing, strike, toss, stop, breathe, start again. The other guys will call out to one another behind him. This morning's factory crew must be out for lunch. Whoa, someone hollers. Swing, strike, breathe. Suddenly, the voices quiet. Nothing moves, only the sound of his breathing, the heat all around him, and the smell. He steps around the edge of a row, cutting stalks as he goes, tossing them, kicking aside the piles of ash and burnt leaves. What in the hell is that? Someone else shouts. Every season after the burning, they find animals in the cane. Snakes, iguanas, bats, all kinds of birds, cane toads. He found a dead dog once, burned to a crisp. Couldn't get the smell out of his head. Everywhere he went, he smelled dead dog. Didn't eat meat again for weeks. Is that? He starts to ask, then stops. All these years, all the burning seasons, he's never seen something like this. He has an urge to cross himself. En el nombre del Padre, y del Hijo, y del Espíritu Santo, he squeezes the grip on his machete. One of the guys backs away, turns toward La Central. A few others follow, but he can't move. The sky is hazy, gray with smoke. Jesus, he says, turning away from the body. Jesus. He heads back, following all the other men. Somewhere in the field, he drops his machete. He leaves it behind, walks faster, starts loosening the straps on his headgear, his goggles. In the sky, above the stacks of La Central, a plague of grackles circles. Thank you.
Oh my! I could just listen to you. Thank you. Round of applause for Jaquira. Your your voice is just so powerful. I love to hear you read. What an opening! Like one thing I really enjoyed about this book is just the way that it's structured. You know, it's broken down into 3 different sections, but you start with this very powerful opening. I think I told you this. I read this book on a flight back from Barcelona, all in one sitting, and I was sweating on the plane. I was like, "What made you start with such a punch with this book?"
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's such a compliment.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted an opening that was doing a lot in very few words. I definitely once I realized that someone was gonna die, I considered how we would find out about this death, and I wrote and rewrote when they find the body and how they find the body and who finds the body. And I struggled with that for a really long time. It took me about 6 years to write this book, and it wasn't until like year 5.5 that I realized, oh, this is going in the prologue. And part of it was that I wanted an opening image, kind of like an establishing shot, to capture La Central as this looming giant factory that is somewhat adjacent to this community, but that something about it feels dark and dangerous. And I wanted the imagery to speak for what is dark and dangerous, which is this place, the sugarcane fields, where lots of things happen at night. where they find this body, but also that this suggests a much larger conflict. It's not just about the body, but it's about how this American sugar factory is literally exhaling black smoke onto this community, and that they have chosen to build this factory right outside the poorest community in this town. And that is the real danger, not just that there's one body, but that they're slowly killing all of us.
Yeah, and that was another thing that I really enjoyed about the book was just the backdrop of like the historical context, talking about all the social issues that's impacting the island, specifically this community. And was that stuff that you knew about, or was that stuff that you had to research as you were doing like your timeline and figuring out where the story took place?
A little bit of both. So I grew up, I mean, I want to say that I grew up in a very political household where my dad was always reading books and talking about politics and talking about colonialism and Puerto Rico's relationship to the US, and political parties and what each political party stood for. I mean, I was hearing these conversations when I was like a child, without actually knowing what people were even talking about. My dad and my dad's brother, my uncle, were both political activists in college, and they protested the US occupation of places like Culebra and Vieques. They protested colonialism. They protested and protested and protested. And my uncle, who's a Catholic priest, is still an activist, even though he's very like up there in age. And so I knew about a lot of this growing up. And then the story that inspired Rey in the book, I also knew about as a child. And I knew that I wanted to write about El Caserío Padre Rivera, which is where I was born and spent my early childhood. And I wanted to speak to ideas that are related to poverty and systemic poverty in general, but also in this very specific case, all the things that come with systemic poverty and El Caserío being this colonial project, and how all of the American factories are always outside the poorest communities, where most of the people inside that community cannot get jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about that too, where just like if you're from this barrio, they're not going to hire you too. Or just
Yeah.
And the way that this book it follows a family, if you haven't read it yet, and there's just so much backstory that you get with Rey, who the story opens up with and introduces with Maricarmen, and then the following two sections really focus heavily on their daughter Nena. And I was wondering, what were you like? Why was it important to capture so much backstory about this one specific family? And by doing so, what did it allow you to explore in the world that they were experiencing?
Thank you for this question. I mean, you refer to it as backstory, but really what I wanted to give readers was a sense that there are many, many stories in this one place. That in El Caserío, everybody has a story. And I think of it more like a multi-generational story where the protagonist changes depending on which part we're in. And depending on which chapter we're in also, we kind of shift points of view, and we spend time kind of seeing Rey in the first part from the outside, from another character's perspective, and then we shift to Maricarmen and we see the world through her eyes. We shift to her daughter in the later parts and see the world through her eyes. But part of what I wanted to emphasize is that in this place is made up of stories, and there's so many stories there, and also to speak to how the stories don't just fade, like they become legends. They live with us, we carry them with us, and they have the potential to shape us and shape who we become. And so even though in the the second half of the book, Nena is the main character, she's a protagonist, her parents' story has shaped who she became. And I feel like they were both kind of the protagonists in the first part of the book.
Yeah, and then it's through these stories that she's able to understand her father too, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah. Another thing that I thought was so brilliantly done was this idea of community and how community shows up a lot in this book. And it's both like, the tenderness of like how a community rallies behind Rey and protects him, but also like turns their back on his family. And you also see it with family abandoning family, friends abandoning friends. And I was just curious as to why was it important for you to capture in this book both the tenderness that comes with family and community, but also kind of like the betrayal that can also come with it?
Yeah. So, I, in part, started with individual characters, and I thought a lot about how I didn't want any of the characters in this book to be a hero or a villain. That I wanted to speak to ideas about what actually make us human. That we're all capable of incredible compassion or terrible cruelty, and I wanted all of the characters, for readers to understand that all of these characters are capable of loving or hating, of doing good or evil, of great things or terrible things. And I wanted the community to be made up of people who are multifaceted and complicated. And when I was thinking about the community and the place, the setting, I thought of El Caserío um, as the place of my childhood where I idealized all of the people I knew, and I definitely knew I didn't want it to be that. I didn't want it to be like this child's version of El Caserío. I wanted it to seem like a place where people are complicated and are allowed to be complicated and fail and are allowed to fail. And so I started to think about how do I actually make this setting, this place, a character. And the only way that I could do it, not just describing the setting of where things take place and giving it a story arc, but using the community as like a representation of the place. And so the community in itself feels like a character that has that somehow changes or is transformed, and they go from being very, very supportive and protective of Rey to the exact opposite, which they turn on his family, and they suddenly, because Rey's little brother comes out as queer or is queer and is outed as queer, then they suddenly turn against him, and we're faced with, oh, actually this seemingly perfect community is actually really deeply homophobic. And I also wanted to speak to how even people in our own communities can be deeply homophobic and anti-Black, racist, can be all those things, and that those are parts of our communities and in everyday life, and that's realistic. I wanted to speak to how all of these things, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Black racism, sexism, misogyny, how all these things um, are not just like one person is this. Like this is systemic and it comes from somewhere. And I was pointing to how systemic poverty is connected to all these things, is connected to colonialism, is connected to power. So I wanted to speak to how all of us, every single one of us, is affected by these things. These things are interconnected. And so when characters act a certain way, it's not just because like one character happens to be racist, it's because systemically there's a system that is built to make us this way. Yeah.
And I think it captures it so well. I felt like you took these very big ideas that could be like very academic and that we learn and talk about, but you applied it through this lens of like family and community, just to make it a little bit more accessible and digestible, and just like, oh yeah, they are complicated. And one thing you do so well is you have such big characters in this book. Like, so, like, when you just like read about them, it's just like, that cannot, I'm just like, wait, no, that is my uncle. Like, I totally recognize this person because, yeah, there could be the greatest person, but then they say this random horrible stuff. I'm like, Theo, why are you saying, like, and I was just curious as to who did you have the most fun writing for? And who was the most challenging, if you could tell us why?
Yeah, Nena was the most challenging. Eventually I figured her out, but she was the most challenging because she started off as a kid, right? A teenager. And I think I thought of her a little bit like me, like this girl who had a crush on her best friend and then was heartbroken. And then I realized my life is so boring. She needs to be more interesting. How do I make her more interesting? That was hard.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of fun writing men.
Ooh, yes.
And I'll tell you why. In my first book, there are almost no men, right? It's women and girls. And And I was like, I don't need to write men. Why would I do that? Why would I do that to myself? And then suddenly I'm writing a novel and I'm like, well, it can't just be a society of women, although I wouldn't mind, but it can't just be a society.
I think right now that's what we really do need. So just, yeah.
And I was like, I'm gonna have to like write a man. And so I started just writing one man, and he was Tito. He was a gay man, and I was like, okay, I like this man. And then I started writing Rey, and I knew that Rey would definitely be part of the story because I had written about Rey in nonfiction, but I could not write from the point of view of Rey. Like I could not write this cishet man's point of view. It felt like alien to me. I was like, what do cis straight men do in the world? They can do anything.
That is true. Yep,
Oh
you are. Yeah.
I found out, yeah. So when I finally figured out that I didn't have to just write gay men, that I could write any man, I was like, wait a minute, I can do anything. So there are robberies, there are men misbehaving, they're in a band.
Yeah.
So they don't have to work. They just, somehow hustle and have money. All the women work. All the women work full time. The women raise kids. They take care of the house. They work. They do everything because this is just like the women I know do everything.
Yeah.
And so I also wanted to, talk about labor. The women were not fun to write. It was a little painful to think back and actually interrogate like the stories of the women I know and the women I knew growing up. Like my grandmother is exactly like Doña Matos. She was a nurse. She worked and worked and worked and raised two kids on her own. Almost all of the women that I know always had jobs, were always working, had multiple jobs, and were also raising children and also responsible for homemaking. And so that was not fun to write. But the men, I think Rey's sections, when he like robs a restaurant, and when he is robbing jewelry stores, and when he robs a poker game, those were really fun to write because I thought, oh, wait a minute, I don't actually need to have consequences. Like when women act like we have consequences, things happen, like, right? But when this character robs a poker game, that was a lot of fun.
Dude, I was sweating. I was just like, what is he doing? Like,
And then so I went and I read Colson Whitehead, and I was like, what would happen in a Colson Whitehead book? I'm not Colson Whitehead. I'm Jaquira Díaz, but I can do it my way. And so I thought, I can't just make this guy a thief, because readers are not gonna love him. I want readers to feel complicated about this character and to have a complicated relationship with him. I want him to be both lovable and hateable.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because like I don't think it's only the readers that have a complicated relationship with Rey. I think it's also the characters in the book, right? Like it speaks to it. Going to follow-up questions, like the first, this writing about women and the women that show up in this book, one thing that I really zoned in on was the relationship of mother and daughter, and how complicated and complex that could be. We see it with Blanca and Maricarmen. We see it with Maricarmen and Nena. And there's a lot there. There's, and it seems that there is this tradition or legacy that's being passed down in terms of like both love and pain.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about why was it important to really showcase how complicated those relationships can be between mother and daughter.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to how I was thinking of all the people in this community that are part of this community. And I wanted to speak to this idea that motherhood is not perfect, that mother-daughter relationships aren't perfect, and they don't have to be perfect in order for us to love each other deeply. And I mean, as a fiction writer, I also needed some obstacles and some conflict. But in order to serve the story, I needed Maricarmen to grapple with her own mother-daughter relationship with Blanca, and Blanca was a terrible mother who like left her on the street, and because she didn't like the relationship that she had with Rey, because Rey was a black man and Blanca, I mean, her name is Blanca, she thinks of herself as
intentional.
Yeah, intentionally. Her name is deliberately Blanca, but I wanted Maricarmen's relationship with her own mother to influence the mother she became. And then as I kept writing, I realized, well, the one thing Maricarmen as a protagonist wants is um, to take care of her family. She wants a family and to take care of her family the way that she was not taken care of. And she wants to be a very loving mother, and she refuses to be the kind of mother she had. And so she starts off as a mother who is deeply caring, who sacrifices herself for her children, and who will do anything to put a roof over their heads and will never ever let them be homeless. Like her mother threw her on the street, so she is like, this will never happen to my kids. And then we get to a point where actually, um, that's not always true. And so I wanted her relationship with her own daughter to be like a series of moments of recognition and reckoning, that she realizes she has tried so hard to not be like her mother that it has controlled her entire life and she's lost control. And then I also wanted Nena to be influenced by her own mother, her relationship with her mother, which starts off loving and like a very healthy relationship, and then ends up where she feels abandoned or is abandoned, and then realizes I have to become the person who takes care of me. I have to become the woman who gets things done, even though she's only a teenager, which is exactly what her mother did.
Yeah, it's the same kind of like history, kind of like cycling through, which I feel like is very real for a lot of families. It's just like, and it takes a moment for you to realize it. But also I felt like Maricarmen was tired. That woman was tired. I was like, you write gay man characters so well.
Thank you.
I was just, as someone who could attest to that, I was like, but there was moments when, with Tito and his interactions, like going out and flirting, and his love interest, which you'll read about when you pick up the book, it's just like so scandalous, but also like so sexy, and it's really sweet because you have this, teenager who's 17, 18, kind of like discovering his own sexuality and what that means. And he has a lot of fun in that process. How did you get into the mindset of writing a gay man?
I read a lot of queer literature, so I was like, I'm going to read a lot of books about gay men. And then I read Sam Delaney's nonfiction book about New York, which has so much sex. What is it called? Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, where he goes into movie theaters, and I was like, this is not what I would normally pick up. There's a lot of there are a lot of bodily fluids in this book, but let's go for it. Let's read this. I also teach queer literature, queer nonfiction class at Columbia in the creative writing program, and I challenged myself, and I was like, I'm gonna read a lot of gay men, which normally would just be like all lesbians.
Yeah.
And it was actually a lot of fun. It was enlightening.
Yeah, it was. We do that. We do that. Speaking of like queer identity and gay identity, there seems to be a queer awakening in the second half of the book, where we see new characters come out as gay, older versions of older versions of the characters. A queer lens on characters that were introduced in the first half. They're like, oh my God, she is, and I wondered, how did that world, was that intentional first and foremost? Okay, perfect. Win. And how did that open up the world for you to kind of have all these queer characters coexisting in this story?
Yeah, so part of this came from my life. As I started thinking about the sections that were in the pharmacy, which was like straight from my life, that's autobiographical. But as I started thinking about how many of us worked in that pharmacy that became a community, how many of us were queer and also closeted. Like we all knew we were queer, but like people outside the pharmacy didn't know. They just, they just went about their day. And part of it was remembering like how like people never had to come out to me. I just knew, and I never had to come out to them. They just knew, and we just were. And then thinking back to all the people in my life, like in high school, in middle school, that I look back now and I'm like, that person was definitely gay.
Yeah.
Like definitely, like it was so clear. And I wanted Nena specifically to live in a world where that Tito never got to live in, right? That Tito, because his life ended, he never got to experience like what it is to have a queer community. And I wanted that for her. I wanted her to find a chosen family, and to actually, she recognizes Tito for the first time as who he is. She sees him. She recognizes that he's gay, and he never has to come out to her. So she has like superpowers, and so she sees Evelyn, and she is like, she's definitely gay. I don't understand how my mother can't tell. Like she has the world's best gaydar. And in the pharmacy, in that community, when she starts to realize, not just, she's a teenager, right? She starts to realize not just Jay is gay, but the pharmacy manager is gay, and all the people like working here, like it is like a little community. And then she starts to realize that all of these people have embraced her and accepted her for who she is, and she doesn't have all of the stigma and the tension that she experienced in El Caserío when everybody had turned against Tito. I also really wanted her to have queer joy, right? To, by the time, the book is so full of death and tragedy, and there's so many terrible things that happen in her family that she feels they're cursed. And I wanted her to see a world that she could actually experience joy, queer joy, and meet someone and fall in love and not have that be ripped away from her.
Yeah, and it is interesting because this happens when she starts acknowledging her truth, right? And that
Yes.
kind of paves the way for other people to acknowledge the truth about complicated relationships, like with her mom's relationship with Ray. And I was just curious as to what role does the truth play in helping shape the arc of the book?
Yeah. So
With whatever you could say, yeah.
yeah, the most important way that I think that the truth shows up is when these characters, Tito and Nena, Tito decides that he is going to tell the truth about himself, and he doesn't care how people react because he's leaving anyway. So he decides that he's going to tell the truth about himself, and demand to be taken seriously, and not accept and not settle, not accept anything lower than what he deserves, or anything less than what he deserves, like Mr. Peña, who is closeted and who is married and who sees him just as a side piece. And he decides, I'm going to tell the truth about myself, and I'm going to be happy, and you can't stop me. And he sets boundaries. And then Nena decides that she's going to live in her truth, that she's going to tell the truth about who she is, but is also immediately drawn to Claudia, who is like a person who is like, she's heavyset and curvaceous, and she feels beautiful, and she's like, I don't care what people think about me. I am beautiful, and I am happy. And so she's immediately drawn to her, and she's full of this really positive energy that is contagious. And she's like, not only did I have a moment where I told her I was gay, but she was like, girl, just be gay.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just be gay. If you're going to be gay, be gay. It's not a big deal. And I think those moments when she realizes, wait a minute, I don't have to live this way. I can live in my truth and be happy and find joy, are really important for who she becomes in the end.
I just had a moment right now that you were saying that. like it is like it's this idea of like representation and seeing someone who's like reflected, like living their truth and being happy. It's like, oh yeah, that could be me too, right?
Yeah.
Like the inspiration behind that. One thing that I really love about Jaquira's writing is her cultural pop references. It's just like infuse it as much as possible. You did it a lot with Ordinary Girls, and I was like, the soundtrack to Ordinary Girls, phenomenal.
Thank you.
The soundtrack to this book, also phenomenal.
Thank you.
And I realize right now, like speaking of queer representation, two icons that show up are Walter Mercado and Michael Jackson in this book. And was that intentional? Or
That was absolutely intentional, and also La Lupe, who I think is
oh
a
yeah,
queer
La Lupe
icon.
too. Yeah, La Lupe is queer. Yeah, yeah.
But there's also there are liner notes in the back that includes a soundtrack to the book. And all the chapters are named after salsa songs. Because I also wanted there to be like a meta conversation about music, And if you know these salsa songs, you know that there's also something like a storyline in each of the salsa songs. There's a, kind of a story. And so the chapter is thematically connected to the story in the salsa song. So there's a kind of conversation happening between the music and the story.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like sometimes, especially with like old school salsa, you forget that like they're like like those are long stories told in the form of a song. Also, like I love La India, and you like reintroduced me to La India. I'm like, oh my god, I can't believe I put her to bed. Like, thank you. And
Oh, I love her too.
I love her, love her, love her. She's going on tour too, so this is a pitch for La India going on tour. So I'm gonna ask like 2 more questions, and we're gonna open it up for audience participation. But I am curious. Like, there is like the title of the book is like really heavy, and there's a lot that kind of comes into it. And with giving as much as we can give away, so that way people get a copy of your book and they buy it and they read it. Like, talk to us about the title.
The title comes directly from a line in a poem by Araceli Gourmet called Elegy, which exists in her book called Kingdom Animalia. And Araceli Gourmet is a Black Puerto Rican Eritrean American poet who whose book is about connectedness to the natural world and about grief and family. And so this poem in particular, Elegy, you kind of, there are several poems in the book that are about grief, and one of them is about losing a brother and about not like the losing a connection, like an embodied connection, and about, in some ways, about experiencing the now and appreciating how we are here now, and not taking that for granted. But also, I think the title in the book takes on other meanings, in addition to being in conversation with this poem, and that's about grief and connectedness. There's also, it takes on a different meaning because the word kingdom is also connected to Rey, which his name means king. And so I want readers to think of the place as a kind of kingdom, or as me referring to the place as a kingdom. And by saying this is the only kingdom, it's also like rejecting this colonial relationship with the US. And it takes on another meaning, which has to do with ideas about heaven and hell and religion. When queer people are told that they will never make it to the kingdom of heaven. And so there's some of that, of all of that in the book.
Yeah. Did you know you could pack so much into one title? There's an entire essay you could write on just the title itself.
Maybe I will.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I'll co-write it with you, so we could. Yeah. Jaquira, this is your second book. You know.
Yeah.
And I loved your first, Ordinary Girls. There's copies of it outside. If you haven't read it, definitely get it. It's so beautifully written. And you know, you got this. Like you've been doing this now, and I was just curious as to what was different about the process of writing This Is the Only Kingdom. How was that different from your memoir, Ordinary Girls? And if this book taught you anything about yourself, or did the process teach you anything?
Yeah. So the book itself definitely taught me something about myself, and that's that I really love to play. Part of what was different about writing this book than writing a memoir and writing nonfiction is that nonfiction felt to me like I had a huge sense of responsibility to the real people and to the truth, and getting it right, and not just getting it right, not just getting the truth right, but being fair, and not letting myself off the hook, right? So I had this huge sense of I have to tell a true story, and I have to focus on how to tell it in a way that's fair and that is serving my community, because I'm not just writing about them, I'm writing about us and for us. So I was really concerned with that. And in this book, I thought, I can play. Like I can rob a bank and I can do that and actually try things that I wouldn't be allowed to try in nonfiction because it didn't happen. So I was like, let's see what happens if Rey decides that he's going to shoot this cop. And then I did that, didn't work. Let's see what happens if this other thing. So I did a lot of playing, like 700 pages worth of playing, just to see how things turned out and to get to know the characters and to feel like I had a sense of what the characters would do. And after I got to know them really well, then I could actually figure out what the story was. And so my sense of responsibility with this book was not, I have a responsibility to the real people and to the truth. It was more like, I have a responsibility to tell a good story that is entertaining, but also propulsive and also layered with meaning. So it's also literature. It's not just, here's a book you get at the airport, read it, toss it. And so I wanted to add layers of meaning that were not just about these characters and not just about the plot, but also about the real history of this place, the real history of Puerto Rico and its relationship to the US. And that said a lot about queerness, and that said a lot about Puerto Ricanness, and that said a lot about families and mother-daughter relationships. So I felt more like adding layers felt like play. And even though it took me 6 years, it felt more like 2. My first book took me 12 years, and it felt like 20.
Oh God, yeah. See, if you're a writer, just keep writing. Just a follow-up process question, like I see how all these themes and social commentary like shows up in the book. Like, do you like have like a sheet of paper where like I want to write about all these things, and then or does it kind of like write itself as you're writing?
I don't have a sheet of paper. It's more like I let the story take me where the story needs to take me, and the characters take me, and they guide me. And then when I see like opportunities, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, here's a good section where I can talk about place. And part of what is true about this place is a history of colonialism that created this place. And I look for when these things are already happening kind of organically in the work so that they don't feel heavy-handed. Because what I want is essentially, yes, I want the book to teach a reader something about history, but I don't want to lecture the reader. I want the reader to learn because the story itself is fascinating and they're immersed, and they're just learning because they're so immersed in the world of the book.
And it comes across like very authentic, like not heavy-handed. We're gonna open it up to audience Q&A. For the record, my favorite character is Evelyn. Read the book and find out what. Yes, dude, I live for Evelyn. Well, she's one of my favorite characters. I have a lot of good characters.
She's my type.
Yeah, that tells you something.
We've got around 15 minutes for your questions. I also have some questions pulled from our online audience, so while everybody is percolating and germinating on their questions, I'm going to ask one from our virtual audience, which is, you touch on so many topics and themes in the book. Is there anything that didn't make it in or had to be cut during the editing process, but that you didn't want to cut?
Yes, thank you for that question. Maybe I'll put this in another book, but yes, there's a moment that happened early on to Maricarmen and her character. I mean, I'm gonna spoil a little bit, but her character eventually uses drugs, and there's a moment where the reader, she has a vision, and it's a ghost, it's a haunting, and the reader does not know. Excuse me. The reader does not know whether that haunting is an actual ghost or if she's having a hallucination. It's never explained, and so that happens once in the book in this version. The final version at the very end, but there was another moment that happened earlier in the book where it felt too heavy-handed and it felt too gratuitous, just me having fun because I like ghosts, and so I cut it. My editor caught it, and I'm glad she caught it. I cut it, and then I thought maybe I'll just write another book that has a haunting.
I'm down for hauntings. Another question from our online audience, which is, what is your writing process like? You mentioned it took you around 6 years to write this book. What was editing like for all of those years?
Thank you. My writing process is messy and all over the place. My first draft, I guess I'll walk you through it. My first draft, I always write by hand in a notebook. And it's not it's not like Joyce Carol Oates sitting down and writing lyrical prose, or it's more like I write lists, like this happens and that happens and that happens, research this happens, that happens, scene about this, and then I write a scene, and then it's like a big sprawling mess. And it's all out of order. It's however things come to me. And then I sit down and ask myself, what is the story? If I wrote it chronologically, or if I wrote a list of scenes, what does that look like? And then after I have like something really rough and messy, then I take all that to the computer. And it's usually like a notebook, like 300 pages of writing and notes. And sometimes post-its and stuff, you know, it's like exploding with language. And I take that to a computer and I try to translate what's in the notebook onto the computer. And in that process of like transcribing and transferring and reimagining, I tend to discover a lot, and that turns into a completely different draft. And then it's like very basic surface level stuff what's in that first computer draft. And then I add layers. So then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna turn all of these sections into scenes. Even if some of them won't be scenes, they're gonna be scenes now because I'm gonna play out what happened. And so I have lots and lots of scenes with not a lot of insight or lyricism or none of that. And so after I have scenes, I'm like, oh, this doesn't work, let me cut this. Oh, this actually works, but I want to change it. And so I start cutting and adding, cutting and adding. And then when it feels like I have like surface level narrative, I'm like, now I'm gonna add some layers. And every draft, I try to take on one thing and one thing only, which is like, today I'm gonna work on setting. So I'm gonna go through this whole manuscript or this whole chapter and think about how the setting is doing more than one thing. Like, setting is not just where something happens, but it's also metaphor, and it's also a way for us to notice how time passes and how things change or stay the same. So I work on setting, and then I work on individual characters. So I'm like, okay, today I'm gonna work on this one character, and I'm gonna track this one character through the entire novel and make sure that that character's dialogue is spot on, that that character's backstory is somehow reflected in their actions, not just told to us. And then I start looking at individual relationships and reversals. This is a lot of detail, but I'm thinking about like Aristotelian reversals and how character relationships change. So characters go from friends to enemies, enemies to friends, or their roles shift in some way. Characters have a falling out, or there are power imbalances that change. Like, one character loses power, the other one gains power. So I try to look at those things. And then I have I have lots of other layers. Like, I work on tone and I work on lots of different things. And the very last thing I do is sentences and like how sentences sound. So I look for the rhythm in the work. And so that becomes like kind of like the sentence as the unit of composition, writing like a composer writes music, thinking about a time signature and about a pace, how the prose is moving. If there's a lot of excitement, then the prose is moving quickly. If there's like a sensual moment, like in El Ratón is very sensual, and there's a sex scene, then the prose is moving a little slower. So I think about that, and then what else? So then later in the very later drafts, I look for themes that were already emerging that I did not intend, because I don't want themes to feel heavy-handed. I want the themes to be like emerging organically. And then I look at how can I play now that I know the whole story. And so that's where the salsa songs came in the later drafts, when I thought, I definitely want to write about El Gran Varón. How do I include El Gran Varón in that very queer salsa song in a way that feels real, that it doesn't feel heavy-handed? And what else? So every draft is like, here's another layer of something.
That was a masterclass right there. And taking me your masterclasses, I'm just like, I'm always blown away by the intention behind your process.
Oh, thank you. Someone once asked me, like, why didn't I include a family tree, because there are so many characters. Like, how there are like some books, like long books, have family trees. Why didn't you include one? And I thought, I did. I had one that I did not include, but I had it up on a wall. When I went to write like a BCCA, I had it up on the studio wall. And I thought I was gonna include it in the beginning, and it was part of my process to actually add things to the family tree. And then I realized, I don't want my readers to have like a cheat code. I don't want them to reference the family tree if they need to reference a family tree to follow along, then I haven't done my job as a writer. I want all of these characters to feel like they're alive and complicated, and like they have conflicts and they have desires, and I want them to stand out so that when the reader is like, there's a woman rollerblading across a pharmacy and she's wearing nothing but shorts and a bikini top, like they know who that is.
Yeah, that's another favorite character too.
Go for it.
I have two projects that I'm toggling between. I always have multiple projects going on, but two of them I actually see potentially as books. So if my publisher's listening, I hope they're planning on giving me money. So I have a novel that I've been thinking about and researching for a long time that would probably take me a long time, a World War II novel that is focused on women in World War II and their involvement in World War II. And then I have a nonfiction book that I thought was an essay collection, but it turns out it's a memoir and it's a sequel to my first book. Well, thank you for that reaction.
I cannot wait. That was a good
I have another online question. I have several online questions. But yes, go for it.
With your characters, what is it like for you emotionally as they go through their different experiences, like all the ups and downs?
Oh, that's such a great question. No one has ever asked me that. I've been waiting for someone to ask me this. I love all my characters, even the evil ones. I adore them, and so when they're suffering, I'm suffering. When they are betrayed, I'm like, oh, I have to take a break. Someone was betrayed. I'm not gonna reveal it because there's a spoiler. Someone was deeply betrayed in the book, and I care about them so much that I was like, how could you do this? How could you possibly do this? And I grieved. I felt betrayed myself. And I don't know that that's normal for writers because I'm like, I did this. The character didn't do this to me. I did this. But I feel a sense of, I guess, not kinship, but I feel like every single one of them has a little bit of me, in a sense. Even the villains have a little bit of me, because I had to imagine what it would be like to be this person in the world in order to react a certain way to an action. So I have to imagine every action has a reaction. People don't just do things because they decide, right? Most of the actions that happen in a novel, or in my novel, are like caused by something, or a character attempts to do something and they have a consequence, right? So there's like cause and consequence, everything is connected. And so because I have to imagine myself as being that character in the moment, I feel like a little bit of grief when things don't turn out well for them. Thank you for that question. I like to think of myself as a method writer, where I'm like, I'm gonna pretend to be Loli today, put on some rollerblades, and go to the pharmacy, probably fall. But I'm gonna pretend to be this character today and play this out and just imagine what the other character's reaction is in order to write it well. And so I think that's why I'm deeply connected to them.
I think we have time for two more questions. I will pull the next one from our online audience, which is, you mentioned that there is a playlist in the back of the book. Was that a playlist that you put together after the book was made, or that you listened to throughout and then compiled it at the end?
I compiled it at the end, so it's liner notes. But I had so I had a playlist that I put together before I wrote the first word, because I always write to music, and so I had a very long playlist that was like 50 songs, and it was mostly salsa and boleros and like Lucecita Benitez and a lot of old school music that I just needed to write in order to write. So I always listen to music as I write, and I tend to put one song on repeat and listen to it on a loop as I'm writing a chapter, and then when the chapter changes, I change the song. And in the very beginning, I just listened to the whole playlist and kept listening to it and listening to it. And then I started to select which songs felt thematically connected to the chapters. And then I narrowed down the playlist to these songs, which are 16 of them in the liner notes. And a couple of them changed as I revised. And I was like, oh, this no longer fits the theme of this song, but I have another song that fits it perfectly. But one of them that I knew was gonna be, two of them that I knew were gonna definitely be in this book were El Ratón and El Gran Barón.
Which one do you think you listen to the most?
El Ratón.
El Ratón.
Yeah, El Gran Barón, I mean, I've been listening to religiously since I was like 16. But El Ratón I listen to the most, and it's my absolute favorite song in the world.
All right, last question of the evening, which is connected to one of our in-person questions, which is that between Ordinary Girls and This Is the Only Kingdom, which one was more emotionally devastating for you to write?
Thank you. Definitely this book, This Is the Only Kingdom, was more emotionally devastating for a lot of reasons, but in part, as I was finishing the book, the last chapter, my mom died. And I was writing the mother-daughter relationship, and which is why I started to read Araceli Guillermé's poems, because I needed something to like tether me to the world and to feel like I feel something more than just the death of my mom at this time. And so in order to finish this book, I had to go out and read lots of other books. This was definitely the most emotionally devastating. And so I was writing this mother-daughter scene as knowing that my mom had just died. And so I was very emotional, and I had to keep stopping and coming back and stopping and coming back. And then also, as I was finishing my edits and changing some of the later chapters, I got divorced. and that was, I mean, not as devastating as losing a parent, but also sad. And I felt, you know, there's grief involved in that too. Although my former partner and I are still friends and we still care for each other so much, it was a different kind of devastation. But then in the later drafts, as I was finishing the last edits, I changed one of the characters, and it was Claudia's character, which Nena meets and falls in love with. I shouldn't have told you that. I spoiled it for you. And I felt like I was kind of manifesting a love for myself. I was like, well, here, if I had to give her someone to fall in love with, what would I have wanted as a teenage girl? And so I made that character. So it was devastating and also hopeful.
Please help me thank tonight's moderator, Adrian Gaston Garcia,
Thank you, Adrian.
and tonight's author, Jaquira Díaz.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so now we're going to sign some books. Snug Books is outside selling books. And thank you for joining us this evening. Have a great rest of your evening. Thank you for coming.